So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the moderator of this panel, who will then introduce the panelists. Juliet Elperin is one of the few folks who were born and bred in our nation's capital, and she started her career with the Washington Post in 1998 as a House reporter. In 2004, she moved to the environmental beat, where she's covered climate change, oceans, and air quality. And the year after that, she became the youngest ever McGraw Professor of Journalism at Princeton University. Her award-winning work has taken her across the globe to the deep caves of Tennessee, the Bahamas, and the Arctic with Hollywood folks as well as political types. She's covered presidential campaigns, and last year we were honored to feature her most recent work, Demon Fish, Travels Through the World with Sharks, at last year's inaugural Authors Coffee, and we're delighted to welcome her back again to this year's Capitol Hill Ocean Week, Juliet Elperin.
Thanks so much. Well, I think I think everyone could agree that this is a fantastic theme for CHOW this year and really kind of explores kind of the critical connections that will have huge implications for what happens in the ocean. When I was writing my book, Demon Fish, my author in New York really wanted it as more of a traditional natural history and basically wanted me to focus on shark biology and what was going on. I informed him that sharks made for terrible interviews, and I didn't know how I was going to do an entire book just focused on actually sharks in the water, and that's really how I came to look at our relationship with sharks and how defining that has been over time. And of course, as people have alluded to, how, for example, the cultures that were closest to the sea actually had, for example, the most nuanced view of sharks as opposed to those who were the most disconnected, who tended to demonize them. And so I think those are obviously some of the key questions that we'll explore on our panel, and we're going to start with Craig McLean, who's Assistant Director of Science for the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center, and he is going to talk about the ocean in American contemporary culture and the implications of that. So please join me in welcoming him. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So my background is as a deep sea biologist, and several years ago, when blogging was new, I started a blog called Deep Sea News, where my goal was to try to merge science and talking about the newest and coolest findings from the oceans with culture, because they're often kept separate. And so I guess when I was invited to give this sort of made me an expert on how oceans influence contemporary and pop culture. And so when we see pictures like this, I grew up in a landlocked state in Arkansas, and my first experience with the ocean was in Galveston, and this is actually a photo from Galveston Bay. And we see pictures like this, photographs like this. It's hard to believe that we're actually inspired at all by the ocean. This is a graph that shows basically the number of sharks that occur, the density of sharks that occur within distance to human populations. And what you can see here is at about 20 kilometers or so, it basically drops to zero. And so basically shark populations severely decline the closer they are to humans. And so when you see things like this, it's hard to believe that we're influenced at all by the oceans. But then, how could we not be? This is my favorite view of planet Earth. This is the view of Earth directly over the Pacific, and there's very little land visible in this. And so, when and it's cliche to say it, perhaps trite even, but we do live on an ocean planet, and so how could we not be inspired by that? And we know that the environment influences us in very profound ways. So the Abrahamic traditions, their view of what occurs to you after death is to go to hell, and the temperature there is very warm. And so, and this is not surprising considering that the Abrahamic traditions grew out of the desert. Now, if you look at Inuit culture, and their religion, they believe that where you go after death is a very, very cold place. And so our environment definitely influences our culture in a very deep and fundamental way. And so as I started thinking about this, I'm like, can I find examples in pop culture of the ocean influencing us? And I realized that I didn't have to look very far. You can see these photos here. One of my favorite, I want to go to whatever cafe can create an anglerfish in the top of a cappuccino. That's my new mission in life. And so the more I looked, I realized that it wasn't that hard to find the evidence of ocean in pop culture. This is Etsy. Etsy is an arts and crafts website where artisans and craftsmen put up their crafts for sale. And so I started off by searching something very specific. I, as a deep sea biologist, have a very inordinate fondness for giant squids. And I constantly seek out new things that have giant squids on them. And so this is not the first time that I've actually searched for giant squids on Etsy. And this time it yielded 330 items. Now, that's really impressive. A giant squid, something that most people have never even seen a specimen of, 333 arts and crafts at Etsy. If you search for ocean, you get over close to 150,000 different items that the artists themselves have tagged as being ocean related or ocean themed. And I find that inspiring. If you search for tattoos, ocean related tattoos, and perhaps you can't see the number there, but it says Google image search for ocean tattoo returns over 1 million hits. Now, probably 50% of those are dolphin tattoos, but I mean, you look here and you can see. I love the fact that there's like a really high biodiversity here in terms of represented in tattoos. So, I got to thinking about what are the ways that the oceans influence our pop culture, and it actually came to me through a friend at the gym that I work out at, and she said, and for a week she said nothing but, I can't wait to get to the beach this weekend. I cannot wait to get to the beach this weekend. I just got to make it till Friday so I can go to the beach. And I got to thinking about this. A lot of people do this. They think of relaxation, recreation as going to the beach, and so this is a Google search. This is a Google trend plot of people searching for the term beach in Google, and it goes back to 2004. And what you can see there are dips and spikes. The spikes correspond to the beginning of summer, and then as the summer progresses, then you start to get a decline, and that happens annually. And in fact, it happens with almost frequency. The interesting thing here is you can also see a slight decline in people searching for beaches, and likely related to the recession. The red line there is people searching for oceans in general. They give you an idea. So people are not necessarily searching for the ocean in Google as much as they're searching for the term beach. And I wanted to show that how important beaches and searching for the oceans are in people's life, as using Google as a metric. And so I needed a frame of reference for this. And I thought, well, what would be an iconic pop icon that I could throw in here to give you an estimate? And so I chose Justin Bieber. That orange line is Justin Bieber. I'm very excited by this finding, to be honest with you. It means that nothing against Justin Bieber, but I find it very, I have hope for the future that more people are searching for the beach and ocean than they are for Justin Bieber. Anyway, this is Twitter. This is, in the last month alone, the hashtag beach. So you can basically create a tag for any tweet by putting the pound symbol in front of it. And including for this conference this week, it's the hashtag is CHOW 2012. And there's been 792,000 tweets in the last month alone. And this is a map of those people. You can see this person here in the middle in the last month tweeted about the beach 20 times. And so that's just a sort of visual way to look at that. And so the evidence of this is all around us. There's the there's an internet memes. Yes, I'm probably the only presentation you're going to see this week that has an LOL cat in it. That was one of my other goals this week. There's these things called LOL cats. There's these images sent around the internet that have funny sayings. I love this one because it seems particularly relevant this morning. There are multiple of these that don't involve cats. They actually involve animals from the ocean. And these are some of my favorites. This is actually my favorite of all time. This is apparently the right audience for that. This is based on a photograph that was recently taken. A seagull on the coast of California found it being taken down by a giant Pacific octopus. And so one of my favorite aspects of this is that one does not simply walk into the lower intertidal. To see an octopus take down a bird is amazing. Fashion. As a scientist, I don't know a lot about high fashion, but I'm told it exists. These are some examples. This year, 2012 on the runway in Paris was a big year for ocean-related fashions, and so all the way from Stella McCartney to Versace. I got to think about other ways that are influenced. These are paint swatches from, in this case, Benjamin Moore and Bear, and you can see here that most of them have. There are multiple shades of blue that are ocean-related. And in fact, I've actually painted my house in this color, which is called Vintage Map, which is the color of oceans in old maps. My wife, who's not a marine biologist, is probably dismayed by that. This is from a design blog where they used pictures of sea slugs, photographs of sea slugs, and the color patterns on them to design color palettes for room decorating. And nothing is more iconic than that red hat. And it's funny, I brought my own along as a prop and then didn't realize that I didn't need to because these were distributed out last night. And of course, that influenced this movie and a whole string of Halloween costumes as well. And not that you need to because we all have these, but I wanted to show you that you can actually purchase that red hat online. Anyway, all of this is reflective. I gave examples of pop culture, but all of this is reflective of a very deep-seated connection we have to the oceans. And it has gone on for a very long time. And so I leave with this question: why can't we turn this deep-seated connection to the ocean into successful conservation and stewardship of the oceans? The interest is there, the love is there. Where's the gap happening? And I encourage everyone to visit my website, Deep Sea News, to keep up on more pop culture. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. I have to tell you that my immediate takeaway is that Craig has something in common with my 3-year-old son, which is an obsession with giant squid that we call giant squid, scary squid in our house, but which is a little more apropos. Now we have Judy Hayner, who's coming, who's the Marine and Freshwater Program Director for Alabama for the Nature Conservancy. She is going to talk about resilient communities and the intersection which Congresswoman Capps alluded to, which is fisheries, offshore energy, and life on the Gulf Coast.
I can't see over the podium. I apologize. I have to slide to the side to see what I'm looking at. Good afternoon, or good morning. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today. We're going to take a journey down to the Gulf Coast and tell you how a farm girl from upstate New York and I fell in love with the Gulf Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. And really, not just the Gulf and its resources, which are spectacular, but the history and the culture and the people of the Gulf, which are even more spectacular. I started out very much like Congresswoman Capps in that my first taste of the Gulf of Mexico was actually through a trip down with my family on vacation and realized that the Gulf of Mexico is actually the playground for the nation. We all spend a lot of time thinking about the beach, much like Craig mentioned. We think about the beach and we think about traveling and putting our feet in the sand in the water and experiencing that salty spray that we get. And me, I like fishing on that beach as well. But along the Gulf Coast, we also have other things that influence the Gulf. We have a strong and vibrant economy that's based on the energy industry. The Gulf of Mexico supports 30% of the nation's domestic oil and gas production. We have 7 of the 15 top ports in the nation, and we're expecting that to increase because we have the Panama Canal expansion pending. And on top of that, who can think of the Gulf without thinking of Gulf seafood? We harvest 70% of the nation's shrimp and 80% of the nation's oysters from the Gulf of Mexico. And these very resources are harvested by well, I guess I like to call them local characters, our local fishermen. I like to think that the Gulf actually flows through their veins. They have these weathered faces, and they have this rich history and this deep tie to the Gulf of Mexico. Oh my gosh, I'm actually going to step up. I hope I don't fall off. Thank you. I apologize. They have this deep... I'm fine. I don't need that. I'm fine. They have this deep tie to the Gulf of Mexico. I met this fisherman about a year ago, and he told me the story of his great-great-grandfather and how he sailed from Norway with his 2 brothers. And they ended up in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, they came into Mobile Bay, and they shipwrecked on, ironically, an oyster reef. They swam to shore, they set up camp, and they have spent 6 generations harvesting Gulf seafood from this area. Just passed it down generation to generation. That culture is strong not just in Alabama, but it's strong across the Gulf, where we have several generations that have lived and worked these waters. Now, what links these folks? What links the visitors to the Gulf of Mexico, the industries, the seafood, and the fishermen? The oyster. The oyster, excuse me, the oyster is actually the architect of the Northern Gulf. It creates complex reef systems that protect our shorelines, that provide habitat for our fish and our shellfish to grow up in. It's home for the babies. It also filters the water, so we get good water quality. But globally, 85% of these reefs have been decimated. A variety of reasons, from disease to overharvest. But we have an opportunity for recovery. In Mobile Bay specifically, our oyster reefs were harvested to build the road that travels between Mobile, Alabama, and New Orleans. So if you've ever taken Route 90 and driven that route along the coast, you've actually driven on Mobile Bay's historic oyster reefs. And we want that back, but I guess we can't dig the road up. So we'll figure out another way to do that. In the meantime, the Nature Conservancy's been working in the Gulf for over 35 years. We've learned how to restore oyster reefs in a different way. You know, to put out bag shell, you've got to have shell. To have shell, you have to have harvestable oysters. And since we've decimated that population, we need to figure out alternate ways. So we're looking at those things. We've started with 50 to 75-foot reefs. We've scaled that up to miles of reef. And with those miles of reef, we've seen that we can protect the shoreline and we can enhance fisheries. And with that, now what we need to do is not protect just those sites that are the miles of shoreline. We need to expand that and protect systems and restore those systems. To do that, we really have to involve the community. As you know, and everybody's seen the big pictures of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, what I wanted to share with you that several people don't know is through the spill, one of the things that happened was the fishery closed. And I'm preaching to the choir here because everybody knows the fishery in the Gulf of Mexico was closed during the spill. But what happened was that put several folks out of work, the fishers that actually fish those waters, but also the processors that process the seafood, and the trickle down through that supply chain. What BP did is they set up a system called Vessels of Opportunity, and they actually created jobs for fishermen to go out and actually deploy and maintain boom along the coastline as part of the protection and response efforts. And that was great if you had a boat. But if you didn't have a boat, it wasn't so great. And what we ended up with is folks along our coastal communities, Southeast Asian communities primarily, that do a lot of the processing in our backyards. In Alabama, we process some 80% or more of the seafood in the Gulf of Mexico. From Florida to Texas, they ship it to Alabama to be processed. So we have a lot of processing houses. These processors didn't have boats. They had a language barrier issue. They were brought over during the Vietnam War and settled into our coastal communities in the Gulf, not just Alabama, but along the entire Gulf Coast, because it was very similar to their homeland. So during the spill, they didn't get the opportunity to get out and help with this boom deployment. They didn't have a check. They didn't have savings in their savings account because they had been relocated to this area, and they didn't have boats to get out on the water. So they literally were starving in our coastal communities. And it's something that I ran into a woman with Boat People SOS who represents them, and she was telling me their story, and it really hit home of how tied they were to what was happening in our coastal waters and what was happening with our fisheries. And so, as one of the first post-spill efforts that we did, we had our contractor hire out-of-work workers from Boat People SOS to bag the shell that were needed for our next round of reefs. And what they did is, it wasn't much, they bagged 25,000 bags of shell for the first quarter-mile reef we put in after the spill. And again, not a lot, but it was something, and it made us feel like we were really giving back to that community. And they were very grateful. And if you can imagine, on top of this particular community, during the spill, we had calls from all over the place of people that wanted to volunteer, that wanted to get involved, that had ties to the Gulf. Whether it was that they came from Wisconsin and they ate seafood from the Gulf, or maybe they actually vacationed on the Gulf, or maybe it was somebody living next door to me that really wanted to get out there and find a way to give back to the Gulf. Regardless, they couldn't get out and help during the spill because it was a hazardous situation. Couldn't just have volunteers going out and helping clean up oil. But what we did do is try to find a way to get these volunteers involved. And so if you can imagine the 25,000 bags of shell that Boat People SOS workers were able to help bag as part of our first reef effort. And if you can imagine a cold January morning on the shores of Mobile Bay, and if you can imagine 500 volunteers, not just from the United States, and I mean all over, from California to Maine. We had a woman that came in from England that wanted to be part of this effort, that wanted to help give something back to the Gulf and make a difference. They were looking for a way to be involved. Well, the mud was somewhere between knee and ankle deep. Some people, in fact, fell over and made mud angels. We had a quarter of a mile of volunteers passing bags and building that reef system that cold January morning. And it was hard work. Everybody was tired and sore at the end of the day, caked with mud, and every single one of them left with a smile on their face because they themselves had actually helped restore part of the Gulf of Mexico. And right now, I would say we are on the cusp of figuring out how we can make an even bigger difference in the Gulf of Mexico. We have an opportunity in front of us that has never been before the Gulf of Mexico before. We have natural resources damage assessment funds. We have a potential settlement with BP. And we have the Restore Act that is out there and being discussed as we speak. And all of those in combination, or any one of those, could really go a long way to helping restore the system as a whole in the Gulf of Mexico. But we have to make wise decisions today that will help support our next generations down the road and provide the tools for them to not only survive in the Gulf of Mexico, but to thrive. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think many of you might be familiar with the idea that one of the most interesting developments we're seeing in education are folks who are working in the museum and aquarium industry connecting people who are near rivers with the ocean. And so Jerry Ensler, our next speaker, is going to talk about this. He's the executive director of the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium, and he will speak to the Maritime Midwest, how rivers and the sea influence the Midwest experience.
Can I have that footstool? No, I guess I won't need it. That'd be tall. So what is somebody from Dubuque, Iowa doing at this session, and in fact all of CHOW? I share something with Juliet in that I was also born here in Washington, D.C., and I view D.C. as part of a coastal community in the sense that when I grew up, I would constantly see, drains to Chesapeake Bay watershed. I'd see that in Bethesda, Maryland. I'd go to my cousin's place at Point Lookout, and we would go crabbing. We would go out in their boats. We would go swim where the Potomac meets the Chesapeake. And there's the Atlantic coast, and there's the Pacific coast, and there's the Gulf Coast. Well, I moved to the fourth coast, and the fourth coast is the Mississippi River. When I first saw the Mississippi River, I was 18 years old, and I was stunned. It's something I had read about all my life, and I never knew when I was going to see it, but I knew it would be a tremendous event in my life. And my talk is going to talk a little bit about my personal journey and how I left this area, went to Iowa, and from Iowa developed connections back to the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Gulf. When I was a boy, there was one permanent ambition among me and my comrades on the west bank of the Mississippi River, and that was to be a steamboat man. I didn't say that. Mark Twain said that. Mark Twain also said this. He said, "The mighty Mississippi, shining in the sun, rolling its mile-wide tide to the sea." He knew 150 years ago that the Mississippi rolls along to the sea. Tina Turner said, I'm not going to sing it, I'm going to say it, "What's love got to do with it?" Well, we took that title and we made a big exhibit label. What's the Mississippi got to do with the ocean anyway? And the answer is, well, just 200 million gallons of water a minute, as well as silt and phosphorus and nitrate and pollutants. And in flood time, that is 1 billion gallons of water every minute. And that water doesn't just flow right to the Gulf and drop off the continental shelf. It's picked up by the Gulf Stream. And it goes east across the Gulf. It goes around the peninsula of Florida. It starts to head up the Atlantic seaboard, almost bringing those waters that pass by my home in Dubuque, Iowa, almost bringing them right back to Washington, D.C. or close to it, like Rehoboth or Bethany. But instead it diverts over towards England. And Benjamin Franklin, as we heard this morning, documented that very evident Gulf Stream. So there's a connection, and that's the essence of what I wanted to say. And many of us are disconnected. In fact, we hear that constantly. We're disconnected. Maybe we're not disconnected, but the world is disconnected from the ocean. My premise is, if you connect to your local stream or river and start to monitor that and start to realize the impact that has on the ocean, you will be a viable ocean worker right away. Instead of, like in Iowa, frankly, people go to the coasts, once every 3 or 4 years, probably even less than that. When I lived in D.C., we only went twice a year. My neighbor went all summer long, but so there's differences there. But it is kind of out of sight, out of mind. And even those people who live in New York City or Los Angeles, it again is out of sight, out of mind. I mean, unless they're going to go to the beach on the weekend, it's not part of their issue. What is their issue is what happens on the sidewalk right in front of your house. The streets where we throw a cigarette butt or a gum wrapper, the alleys where some people pour paint, the driveways where the oil is dripping from our car, that is the ocean. Because it might be dry this morning, but when it rains today, later today, it is part of the stream that flows into the river, that flows into the sea. And so when people start to take a personal connection every day in their life, is there litter or trash on my property and in my neighborhood? And what's happening not only on the farms with nitrates and phosphorus, but what's happening on the golf courses and what's happening on my own lawn and what's happening on the city hall lawn. So where's all that going? It's going to the ocean. My premise is, as a river person, I'm an ocean person. And if we want to attract the 200 to 300 million people in this country that we're trying to reach, I think it's one thing to say, you need to be concerned about this vast thing that you might see occasionally. I think you need to be concerned about what's going on literally in your rain gutter, right above your head, because that is also a source of the ocean. When I first saw some of the rivers in this mid part of the country, I was astounded. Certainly the Mississippi, it was just a stunning thing for me. And I guess that means I grew up, I guess, kind of a romantic, and I loved the stories of the ancient explorers and the Native Americans and the early settlers. And I just love those stories, the drama of that. And so when I went to Cairo, Illinois, it was very impressive. And that's how they pronounce it, Cairo, not Cairo. And in Cairo, that's where the Illinois comes into the Mississippi. And we're up high on a bluff. And, you know, some people see the barges going by. What I see is, you know, 250 years ago, somebody paddling down the Ohio and then coming into the Mississippi, and there's a flow of water. Or when I'm standing at St. Louis under the arch, and I look out, and I see actually two rivers flowing by, and you really should try this, or if you're flying over it, you see closest to you, you see the Missouri River channel, and it's darker, it's more chocolatey, and if there's been a lot of high water, you'll see big logs flowing down that side of the river. And then you'll see the Illinois side across the way, and that's really more the main stem of the Mississippi. So these two go for about 2 miles side by side before they start to blend. Now further in Pittsburgh, you have the Three Rivers area. You probably know it from Three Rivers Stadium. And we all know it's the Ohio. You may or may not know it's the Allegheny and the Monongahela. And those three rivers form, you know, that delta area there. And there I think of Fort Pitt, and I think of what's up the far reaches of the Monongahela and the Alleghenies. How many of you live or were born in the Mississippi River watershed, or have lived a significant amount of time? Well, there's a few. I'm going to ask a question again in a minute. When I go out to the Three Forks of the Missouri, now this is north of Yellowstone in Montana, and there you've got the Jefferson and the Gallatin and the Madison, and they all form together in this beautiful little mosquito-infested state park, forming the Missouri River. And it is beautiful if you put on something to protect yourself. That also is a start or a portion of the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River is so thirsty, it spreads its arms so wide, it drinks the waters from 31 states. New York, and Pennsylvania, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado. So now imagine that huge expanse of the country in 31 states coming together. How many of you now know that you were either born in or lived at some part of your life within that Mississippi River watershed? No more Pennsylvanias or Idahos, Colorados, Montanas, yeah. So we're all part of this great river system. And this system is connected to the ocean, you know, from its very beginnings. I live in Dubuque, Iowa. It was a place for lead mines. And over 300 years ago, the maps in France had the notation mine de plume, lead mines. And 30, 40, 50 years before George Washington and the other founding fathers and mothers were even born, they were mining lead in Dubuque, Iowa. And it was easier to cross the Atlantic, go up the Mississippi, almost to the Canadian border if you wanted to, but go up the Mississippi to these great lead resources in Dubuque. That was part of our ocean economy. And it still is part of our ocean economy. The enormous amounts of grain that are grown in the heartland and then trucked or trained to these ports, loaded onto barges, and come down on the upper Mississippi, 15 huge barges, on the lower Mississippi, 50 to 70 barges. Then they get downloaded the grain gets downloaded into an ocean-going vessel, and it goes to world markets. So Dubuque, Iowa, and Sioux City, and Paducah, they're all part of this global ocean commerce. And so I grew up in Washington. I went to the Fourth Coast. I'm finding that the Fourth Coast really is still part of the ocean. I get chills sometimes when I read what Samuel Champlain wrote in 1603. He was thinking of this vast continent in North America. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew it was huge. And he said, with these birch bark canoes and with Indians as guides, we can paddle and see all that there is, meaning in North America. And indeed you can. You can connect your way all the way through this great nation of ours. and it all connects to the sea. When you live in a coastal community, you are, time's up, you are within your own community, but you don't necessarily feel those same connections. When you live on the river, you look north and you look south, and you know that those people are part of your community. We all live downstream. As they say in New Orleans, what you had for breakfast this morning is going to end up in our coffee next week. And like it or not, that's just the way it is. So I guess my message is we are connected. The maritime heritage of this nation includes rivers, and it includes, by the way, one last thing, South Bend, Indiana, home of the Fighting Irish. Why is it named South Bend? That's the South Bend of the St. Joseph River. Portage, Stillwater, Brooklyn, all these are maritime or river names. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Sherry. Now our last panelist, before we open up, we're going to have questions and discussion, is Stephen Carr, who's Chief Technology Officer for the Ventura County Office of Education, and he'll be talking about the ocean psyche, education, coastal tourism, and recreation, as well as the Southern California lifestyle.
Thank you. And I first want to say how honored I am to be here. You're probably wondering why, as a Chief Technology Officer up here talking about technology and oceans, hopefully I can weave this together in 10 minutes and tell you a little bit about what's going on. First, I'd like to say that I'm not a scientist. Again, I'm an educator. That's where I started my career. But in Southern California, where I live and have raised my family, over 22 million people, representing over 152 cultures, and 60% of the state's population is in this surrounding area. I actually have lived for the last 30 years in this area around Ventura County, right off of the coast. I live now up in Ojai, and I've raised my boys up there. This area is all within a short drive of our incredible ocean and our coastal resources. You just look on some of these slides. Our beaches and coastal and offshore waters are the mainstay of our state's economy, and a wide variety of commercial and recreational pursuits. Like others, Californians tend to have a spiritual and emotional connection to the ocean. My own connection to the ocean started here. I am the second of a family of 9 children, and this was our summer vacations took place down in the Hamptons. We grew up in Larchmont, New York, but would drive out to the Hamptons and spend a couple of weeks. And it was something where this was lunchtime. We would all sit up on a lifeboat, and Mom would bring us out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then we'd get back in the ocean. But I have to say that part of it was watching my dad body surf and also sail in his Lightning. And he was a big sailor. In fact, I'm very honored right now that my dad drove down from Pennsylvania. He's 82 years old, and he is my first connection to the sea. My dad is in the back. Dad, would you raise your... Anyway. He introduced me not only to his passion for sailing, but he was a great body surfer. And following him to this day, he still gets out and we body surf together. I was so excited. He also spent his career as a maritime attorney for over 40 years. So he has a direct connection to the sea, and he has passed that on to me. And I have in turn tried to do that with my own sons. So when I was about 13, my grandparents had moved to the East Coast and then relocated when they retired in 1960 back to California. I had a chance when I was 13 years old to come back out to California and visit, and I was hooked. From that point on, I ended up moving out to California in 1976, and I went to school at UC Santa Cruz. I studied politics and philosophy, but surf was always in my wheelhouse, and I loved surfing. I've traveled all oceans that I can think of in pursuit of surf, and I have since raised my boys on the beach and given them an opportunity to also, whenever Dad comes out to visit, we are down at the beach again. And all 3 of them have made surfing as part of their life too. In fact, this is some of the early days from the time my oldest son Sean is 11 in this shot, and that's when I first got him out in the water. he has long since left me in the past. And when cousins would come out, we would all take them down to the beach and kind of acculturate them to the Southern California hang loose lifestyle. My oldest son, Sean, as I mentioned, has surf in his ocean in his veins. He would do more. If he could surf all his life, that's all he would do. But he is a great surfer. I am proud to say that he went to Cal State Channel Islands, graduated with a biology degree, and now has really kind of the best of all worlds. He is actually a seabird biologist out on Santa Barbara Island. So he spends a week on the island and a week off the island. And it's just one of these things that I've seen this education and this passion passed down through those generations. This is a painting done by my son Ryan, my middle son, who's an artist, and I think he kind of depicts that ocean psyche and what that means. I've got this hanging in my house now, and I just love this photo because I think or this painting, because I think it depicts what that ocean means to me. My career, it was really as a classroom teacher, and I worked as a classroom teacher teaching 8th grade American history to students throughout Oxnard, South Oxnard. And much like Congresswoman Capps said, the thing that was amazing to me is that when I looked at it, I'll also mention too that this is not a pretty picture, but this is really what I do for a living. We manage the payroll and host applications for all the school districts in Ventura County. We serve over 145,000 students, but the main thing we do is get them paid. However, we are also the internet service provider for all of the school districts in Ventura County. And these red lines represent the microwave links that we connect all the school districts together through microwave and fiber. And one of the things that we had the opportunity to do is you see those long links going out to the islands. We started a microwave link that went out to those islands, and I'll tell you what that's about in just a minute. But very much like Congresswoman Capps was saying, I taught school at this school, Blackstock Junior High School, which was less than a mile from the beach, and I was amazed when I got to meet and know hundreds and thousands of students over the 12 years that I taught history, that many of them had never been to the beach. So the thought was, if there was a way that we could bring that technology that we were using to connect those islands back to students, and ultimately not just to serve Ventura County, but to make that available for the world, it would be a great way to kind of pass on that culture and that psyche. So what we started, and this is a partnership actually between the Channel Islands National Park Service and also between NOAA and the National Marine Sanctuary, we started this program called Channel Islands Live. And what Channel Islands Live is real-time interaction. We have microwave links that take programs that are being delivered out on the islands and provide them directly on the web, available for passive viewing, as well as interactive viewing. And I'll show you about that in just a little bit. But also was mentioned was the BWET program. We've had, over the years, we've had over 2,000 4th through 8th grade students in Ventura participate in the last 4 years. We include teacher professional development in that, and we also embed California science standards into that. Students participate both virtually as well as actually by going out to the island and doing science. And I'll show you a couple slides of that in just a minute. Here is field trips. So one of the things that we do as part of the BWET program is we take students directly from their schools and we bring them down to the park headquarters. And in the park headquarters, we not only give them hands-on science, but we culminate with a virtual dive. And what happens is they actually get to see this diver underwater. And then the culminating thing is we give them a chance to go out to Anacapa Island or Santa Cruz Island, and they learn all about boat safety. This is amazing when you see kids who have never been on a boat before, let alone out in the ocean. And they actually go out and they go into the intertidal zone. They use the quadrats and they use these data sheets and they start learning about marine species and counting them, and that data goes back into our program. But it's the actual doing of science and the actual feeling of science that really brings it home. I am going to skip to the last slide because this is actually a live dive.
In Landing Cove, one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet, the kelp forest. This kelp forest is home to nearly 1,000 different marine organisms, from tiny one-celled plankton to sea lions, sea birds, dolphins, and on occasion whales. All of these species together form an intricate web of life, and and create a healthy, balanced marine environment.
So that's just an example, a short clip of that diver. That's Kelly Moore. She's a ranger from Channel Islands Live. They go underwater. We have a 300-foot tether that takes them up to the mainland, and we broadcast this out into classrooms and into the park auditorium. And we actually are making this interactive now, where students can actually ask Kelly questions from their classroom in Indiana. In fact, they just recently went through one, and here were some of the comments that they did after one of these live dives. Wow, I could never imagine what those islands look like. These were kids who, that was awesome. We are so lucky to have been part of that. I've never seen the ocean before. It's incredible. This is from Indiana. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say, first, I put in some shots of my dad, my own connection, my own education about the ocean. But what I'm really hoping out of this is that we are able to then take that and bring it into the lives of these children who don't necessarily have that personal connection, but by exposing them and giving them these tools of technology, we can bring that home to them, because that's the experience that they have. So in summary, if any of you ever want to watch any of these live dives, we have them scheduled on the Channel Islands website. It's nps.gov/CHIZ, and you can actually see the little embedded video there. You can blow that up on the screen and watch it passively, or when we work out with students, we actually have it where we coordinate with a teacher and they can actually interact live and ask questions, and it really brings it home for them. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks. Now, so we had, I just think, 4 terrific presentations, and so now I'll throw out a couple questions and see what people take. I wanna kind of riff off Stephen's presentation and ask you a little bit more about technology, because I think that what's so interesting is that there are ways in which technology offers so many opportunities in terms of connecting people to oceans, but it also, can kind of the proliferation of technology, particularly among young people, can pose a challenge in terms of what's their actual experience and to what extent are they distracted by other things that are going on. So I was hoping maybe some of the rest of the panel could talk a little about where have you seen technology at its most successful? Does satellite tracking, is that one of the ways that really resonates with people? Are there ways where you've seen it, again, work or not work? Since clearly going forward, in order to expand the opportunities, that's really one place where we have to look at. Craig, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I would say, as a deep sea biologist, I'm, inundated with high tech, and lots of things. But it's been this sort of low tech technology that's been probably the most powerful for me. Mm-hmm. The internet, blogging, tweeting, Facebook has allowed me and has allowed scientists in general to form a direct connection with the public in a way that's never been possible in the past. Previously, when we wanted to talk about science with the public, we went through mainstream media, and now being able to do it on my own, I think has been wonderful, and never knew that I could have such an audience for that through something very simple.
Don't worry about me getting a paycheck or anything.
No, I'm not. I didn't say we did it well. I just said we could do it. No, and I think there's a role. I think there's a role for both mainstream media and for scientists in general to work. I mean, we both have the same goal, the same goal, and so, but I think it allows science to become something less abstract and more personalized, because they're getting not only the science, but they're getting a personal connection to the people who do science.
Right. No, that's a great idea. Judy, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, and we've actually worked on curriculums through Discovery Education, where we've developed programs that can be taken into schools and used in the classrooms, and they include interviews with scientists asking questions, and some of that will end up being interactive down the road, which is on our end really exciting. At the community level, we have challenges because in some cases our communities aren't super connected to the internet, and they're not tweeting, or if they get email, that's a really good thing. So we're still having to do a lot of on the ground. So I think in some cases we're still developing.
Charity.
We're a member of the Coastal America Ecosystem Learning Center. There are 24 of these aquariums or nature centers, and collectively we reach about 30 million people. And so it was about 5 years ago we were sitting with CEQ, Council for Environmental Quality, and Jim Connaughton was the chair of that, and he said, folks, meaning the Department of Defense and state and everybody else, we got a problem. We've got these great messages to tell about ocean literacy, and nobody's listening. These aquariums have 30 million people. They're not only listening, but they're shelling out $5, $10, $20 a person just to come and say, tell me your message. So we formed a partnership with NOAA and Smithsonian and used technology, and we developed, the overall concept is an ocean interpretive station within each of these aquariums, where we're going to tell the principles of ocean literacy. But the first step was an Ocean Today kiosk, and you have seen it probably, or you will see it at the Sant Ocean Hall at the Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian. And so what our role was, and I was instrumental at working with Ted Beatty at the Shed, of getting that piece from NOAA and from Smithsonian and put it in these other sites. So we now have it in 14 other aquariums. So we're reaching about 18 million people a year with all these messages, electronic messages, and it's updated. Some of it's updated every night with new information. And we have another 10 aquariums that are waiting to be part of it, and it's a funding issue. So that's a unique way of using technology, but also, some people have a message to tell. Some people already got a huge audience, and they just need a little bit of help money-wise to bring their message, collaboratively to 30 million people a year.
Great. Steve, do you have thoughts of, obviously the live chat seems something, that's incredibly compelling, but in terms of the technology that you've been experimenting with, have there been flops? Have there been other things that you think, did better than you expected? Things like that?
Oh, yeah. There are flops all the time. One of the things that's a challenge, and I think Judy mentioned it, is the reality is a lot of the schools still aren't connected. And while we're getting closer, and we may have connections down to a district office, when you get right into a classroom, there's not the full connection right down to that classroom level. I think one of the things that we've also experienced, we started about 5 years ago when we did the first webcam with IWS for the bald eagles hatching out on Channel Islands. We helped them set that link up. We also set up a discussion board. One thing that we didn't realize when we set up this discussion board, we had literally millions of people hitting that from all over the world who wanted to comment on these eagles. Mm-hmm. But they also wanted to comment about a lot of other things as well. We had realtors going on. We had people selling their wares. And what we realized is we let this out way faster than we had anticipated, and we didn't really have a plan to moderate the discussions. And so we had to kind of reel it back in again. We had to set up etiquette and protocols. We had to have people sign back up again. But the long and short of it is now they are self-moderating. And it's really wonderful to watch still the interaction that is germane about the Eagles, and it's not about who's getting married to who, because that was a lot of that kind of thing going on. But
are people empowered to take down other comments, or it's more like they can just say, please stop yammering on your personal
Some of the people who are really kind of the initial contributors actually volunteered to be moderators. Okay. And so we taught them what the protocols were, and they actually moderate. So they'll warn people if they get off topic, and they bring them back in, and if they really violate it, then they're kicked off. But that's essentially how we've worked it. But those are some of the things that we've experienced with it. Yeah.
Excellent. Then another thing I just was thinking about when Craig was speaking with the Red Hat and Jacques Cousteau is the idea of, obviously, again, several decades ago, there were a couple of incredibly seminal figures who helped really engage the public, whether certainly in the United States and also globally, with the ocean. So obviously, Jacques Cousteau is someone, I constantly am interviewing marine biologists who were inspired by him, or, talking to people. Even the fictional character, of course, of Hooper in Jaws it inspired many people. I attribute this to the fact that people actually saw the movie and didn't read the books, where, there's a difference about whether he survives or not. But in that context, you have a lot of people today, you have celebrities who talk about this. You obviously have, I actually was lucky enough to meet the 11-year-old winner of the Christopher Benchley Award, Takaya from Canada, who's has authored and sings a song called Shallow Waters about the possible impact on oil sands extraction in Canada, on the British Columbia coast. She's got 100,000 YouTube hits and clearly seems to be having connected with people. I'd be interested in people's thoughts of, when you look at who's kind of speaking for the oceans and influencing kind of our contemporary view of what's going on, who are the people who you think are most compelling and actually having an influence, even if no one has quite the stature of a Jacques Cousteau?
I'll just step forward and just say, last night, Sylvia Earle was there, and she is one of my all-time faves. I think she has been so inspiring and has really just maintained such consistency and involvement throughout her career in issues related to the ocean and the coast, and has such a good understanding. I think she, from my end, she's just a real icon, and she kind of sticks out there above the others.
Definitely. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Steve.
I was going to mention Bob Ballard had with the Jason Project and what happened with that. That was really, I think, our foray in Ventura County into really getting education tied back into the oceans. And even though the technology, when he started way back when, was not completely there yet for us to be able to connect and watch what was happening in the sea, it began to kind of raise enthusiasm, got people interested, and I think was the start of the curriculum building that took place to kind of develop a science-based curriculum around that Jason Project, and really helped kind of springboard California and other states into looking at oceans.
Right.
Juliet,
Yeah,
a
Jerry,
little,
go
a little
ahead.
switch to your question. For young children, I think it might be Ariel, the mermaid, or Nemo, is it?
Yep, Nemo the clownfish.
Right, or Crush, the turtle. But we haven't really. I mean, we have had some preliminary conversations with Disney whether they would lend those characters, for a nationwide marketing campaign, which I think would be very successful. And then there's SpongeBob SquarePants, which is not really. I'm not sure he's the greatest model, but I mean, these are the people that are reaching the 3 to 7 year olds, and we should consider them.
Excellent. And then, one of the other things is obviously that comes through in your presentations is kind of all the different ways people connect to or view the oceans. That, again, it's such a complicated story when you're talking about recreation, when you're talking about fisheries or energy exploration, coastal protection. One of the things I think that's hard is people view the ocean has so many purposes and people view it in such different ways. And I'm just curious about, again, whether people think, are we getting more sophisticated or less sophisticated in kind of understanding all the different ways in which the oceans are operating, and also, and again, Congresswoman Capps made an allusion to sea level rise and kind of ocean acidification, some of the threats that obviously not only the oceans are facing, but that they can also even pose to coastal communities, and whether that is changing the way people view the ocean. So I guess I would just be interested in your sense of how does this story play out given all the different dimensions, and given, frankly, of course, some of the very, negative things we're hearing about the oceans in light of both the threats they're facing and what they could pose. Do people have thoughts about that? They could say.
I think it's because I think the public is inundated with so much information, and about various threats, whether it's acidification, whether it's warming, whether it's anoxia, pollution, overfishing, that I think all of that information coming in starts to become an overload, and as much as sort of this then sort of phenomena of modern society where we have access, most of us have access to a wealth of information beyond what we could begin to comprehend. And so the problem is that often we have multiple sources of information coming at us from different sources, and they're not integrated. And I think that becomes overwhelming. And even in terms of a single issue like overfishing, it's often there's so many different, and as someone with a PhD in marine biology, it should be relatively easy for me to go out to eat and have seafood and know which seafood that I can and cannot have, and deciphering when it's like, how was it caught, when was it caught, where was it caught, is it actually the fish that it's supposed to be? I mean, if it's that difficult for me, how it's in orders of magnitude harder for someone, for the general
non-expert,
public. That's
right.
right. And so I think identifying sources that serve as a singular hub that people trust and know that they can go there and get the information for a variety of issues, and for various agencies, nonprofits, and stuff like that to come together with a more cohesive message, I think is going to be important.
Right, excellent. Does anyone else?
And I think, Craig, you hit that because for the public, it's confusing, and for those local decision makers that are also trying to think about how to advance and make changes in their communities and prepare them for the future, I think they're not sure, what are the credible sources. And it is an information overload, and how to kind of sort out those priorities. That's some of what we're seeing in our coastal communities. What takes precedence if you only have enough money for one thing? What ranks highest, and what's given more importance. And I think there's some tough decisions, and when you have information overload and you're not sure whether those sources are truly credible, I think that can be very confusing.
And I think there's so many environmental causes that we're asked to support. The information is out there, but do people even want to learn it? Do they want to know about it? A lot of people think, well, the most important thing I can do is recycle in my home, or I can do this, or I can do this. And so that has an effect, but it's not, they don't really realize they're doing anything for the ocean. We surveyed 1,000 people along the Mississippi River, and we found that preserving the ocean or the river, frankly, is not a very high priority until they started to recognize the heritage, and that's why it fits to this conference, the heritage and the pride that people feel for America's river and the history of our nation. Then they started to feel more motivated to conserve and preserve the natural environment of the Mississippi and the Gulf.
I would just add that in one of the local campaigns that took place in Southern California was the idea of stamping curbs that dump here and it drains to the ocean. And it's a little picture, but it also has the language there, and it's done on almost every local curbside. That has made a difference. I think it makes people think twice about it. As a longtime surfer, there is no clearer evidence than after a rain going out and surfing. And even on public or consumer websites like Surfline, there is a warning after every rain. It warns you 72 hours stay out of the water because all the the rivers drain to the ocean. So very much what you're saying, Jerry. Those are the kinds of things that you learn firsthand. And but that's a campaign that I think has worked in California, and those are the kinds of efforts I think that can continue to work.
Right, and it's interesting, but picking up on that, the UN Environment Program has a report that actually the embargo just listed half an hour ago. I have already written about it because I knew I'd be here. And one of the things that they say there is they looked at several hundred indicators in the world of how we're doing on environmental issues. And out of literally more than 500, there are only 4 in which we've made significant progress. And one of them is research about marine pollution, but we have made little or no progress on actually curbing marine pollution, which I thought was a really interesting, snapshot of where we are. Although I think literally in the last couple of years, few years, we've really seen the beginning of grassroots efforts that might have some impact there. At this point, I would love to open it up for questions. I still have more, but it's a little hard because it's dark. But if people do have questions, please raise your hands. Okay, great. And then, why don't we start there? And there's a microphone that will come to you, and please identify yourself when you ask a question. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, Juliet. I just have a question for Craig about, you talk about sort of loving and protecting what you love. How do we get people to relate and understand about the deep ocean, and what are the major threats due to mining and deep sea drilling, in your opinion, from an ecological point of view?
People always ask me, how do we get people excited about the deep ocean? I've actually never found it hard to do that whatsoever. My blog now is a general ocean blog, and it's very early form. It was about nothing but the deep sea. And through that, I was able to, now we have a really substantial traffic of a few 100,000 people per month at the website. But even when it was still about deep sea, it was 50,000 people per month, which I thought at the time was very respectable, and still do. And so, and all I was talking about was the deep sea, and I wasn't really, just recently, how many people saw the video of the jellyfish taken by the ROV on that? In fact, nobody knew exactly what it was at the first. It was like, is that a plastic bag? A whale placenta was one of my favorite explanations. It was not a whale placenta. It was a jellyfish. I can see where that confusion might have arisen. This thing went viral in the true sense of the term, of something being viral on the internet. And it's a deep sea jellyfish, and people are so amazed and so captivated by it that it's really not difficult whatsoever. Again, it's one of those things, how do we take this interest, how do we take this love for the ocean that clearly exists, and as the presentations yesterday and today have shown, there is this deep, really deep seated connection in an American culture with this connection to the ocean. And I don't know how, I haven't figured out how to translate that into something else. And, especially as it used to be, when it's funny, when I first started doing research in the deep sea, I thought of the deep sea as probably the last pristine environment on Earth. And over the last decade, that is I can no longer say that. I usually say now it's probably the most pristine environment on Earth. And, our fisheries have moved into deep water. That's probably one of the clearest threats right now. There are groups like Nautilus Mining that are looking at mining massive sulfide deposits, hydrothermal vents. There is now, because of the discovery of rare earth metals on the abyssal plain in the Pacific, there's probably going to be a large push for mining of those. And those are just the sort of more tangible things. And we haven't even, things like acidification, warming. There's been several studies showing that the productivity of the oceans is declining, which is going to have a huge impact on the deep sea, because the deep sea is typically considered to be a food-limited environment, because it's relying upon material carbon sinking from the ocean surface down, and that's not very much. It's only about 2 to 3% of the total production on the ocean surface, and so these things that are a little bit more, that are long-term and more abstract, I think, are the most difficult. And I think people work in conservation and policy, when we talk about those things, those are much harder to deal with, I think.
Judy, I was wondering if you could pick up, since part of that question addressed deep water drilling. I certainly know, having covered the BP oil spill, having spent that time there, I basically, I almost couldn't find someone in the Gulf who said that they wanted a moratorium on deep water drilling when that was going on, even when they were coping with the impacts of the spill. Can you give just a little sense of, how is the coastal community viewing that now? Are there any changes, and how do you see those two things coexisting?
I think the coastal community wants it safer. The Gulf has been, and energy has been, such an integral part of the Gulf and what we do and the energy that we provide for the nation. I think very few of us want to give up our vehicles permanently or give up the air conditioning that helps support that. And I think what they want to see are better guidelines in place that help us address this. I think we all have our eyes wide open now that it's not, if it's going to happen again, there will be another spill. I mean, the congressman referenced one from California this morning. We've had this one from the Gulf. We know about the one in Alaska. I think it's a when, and hopefully, as a nation, we're better prepared for it, for where it happens. And I think that's what we hope comes out of it in the Gulf, is that we can learn some lessons, and we can have those lessons in our back pocket to apply to the future.
One thing, and then we'll take more questions, but I'm wondering, since actually we were talking about drilling, it made me think of the Arctic, and obviously we've been talking a little more about tropical oceans and warmer oceans. Would anyone want to speak to kind of, again, the Arctic Ocean, both because this is becoming a frontier that's being penetrated, how people view it, whether it's an afterthought in generally people's view of the sea, since obviously, again, the Arctic Ocean is also part of the United States as well. Any thoughts at all? Does that come up? If you don't? All right, they don't think about the Arctic Ocean. All right, moving on. Go ahead. Wait 1 second. Please identify yourself if you don't mind.
Cord Atkinson, Savannah Ocean Exchange. You made the comment of students 1 mile from the ocean that hadn't seen the ocean. I think that that is something that, to me, is I'm encountering every day. So I'd like to hear from each of you about your suggestion, which takes youth. I'm going to say anybody under 20 or under 25, and gets them to a water source, the ocean, the river, and has them experience good stuff. And that's, I'm going to throw in there, I have no budget to make it happen. So what I'd like is your top 3, if you've got them. I'll take a top 1. How do you get youth to have a great experience on the water, in the water, near the water?
Well, I'll just start because if you don't mind, you know, the BWET program was our vehicle to kind of get things rolling. We had rangers, actually outreach rangers, going out to classrooms and coordinating with science teachers anyway. But what the BWET program did is it took it that next step and provided field trips, buses, and then paid for the island concessionaire, the island packers boats to go out. What we've come away with since that funding has now dried up, we started reaching out to local Rotarian groups and other local fundraising groups. We now have a business model where if a Rotarian group wants to adopt a class of 30 students for a year, we know approximately that we can do this for about $5,000, and they can take 30 students in that year and not only provide professional development for that teacher, coordination with our office and with the Park Service, and they can get kids on buses down to the park headquarters, they can get them on boats out to the island. So we've got this model going now that we can sustain some of this, even though we can have local PTAs, we can have other local organizations help raise money, because we have a business model that can say, for $5,000 we can adopt a class for that year, and that will mean a bus trip down to the park headquarters, that means a boat trip out to the islands, that means ongoing training for the teacher and for those students, and then the virtual connections that are already in place. So just our example.
We had a boat taking people along the Mississippi and then into some backwaters. We built a wetland, actually. I mean, that was very expensive. That was over $2 million just to build that wetland. So I wouldn't recommend go ahead and restore a wetland. But you know, there's a funny thing. You know, schools are finding themselves, you know, overwhelmed with students and not enough resources. Some museums and nature centers are underwhelmed. They've got capacity and they don't have enough visitors, and so there's a good opportunity for a Rotary Club or another group to help provide some funding and take a little bit of the burden off the schools and get them to a local nature center. We did a program called Hey, That's My River, and it was aimed at young kids. Ben Grumbles, head of water for EPA, several years ago, he came out to Dubuque and helped us launch it. And the stunning success that came from that, we had the manager of our John Deere plant was out doing some fertilizing of his lawn, and his 7-year-old daughter came out and said, "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm putting on some fertilizer." "Well, let's take a look at the bag and see whether you're putting on the right levels." He said, "You know, I manage a big factory. I've got 2,000 people." He said, "Well, let's look at it anyway." And so he was doing it correctly. "Where did you learn this?" And she said, "Well, you know, Saturday I went to the museum and aquarium, and it was, hey, that's my river. And it is my river, Dad." And I was appointed to be kind of the family and maybe even the neighborhood representative to protect the river. So he was so impressed. He goes to his office at John Deere, and that week he has to make an address anyway to all 2,000 employees. And so he talks about that, and he talks about how John Deere, this Dubuque plant needs to be more green and more. So, I mean, it really was helpful, and I commend you for the idea of, you know, getting to the youth and also giving them a charge that, you know, they're going to be, without being obnoxious about it, but they're going to be the ones who can tell the manager of John Deere, "Hey, Dad, do this correctly."
Yeah, and I would say, you know, at our local office in the Nature Conservancy in Alabama, we're not doing a lot of education ourselves because we have partners that can do that. The budget is the biggest thing. We have worked with some school groups, and they really do have just horrific budgets for doing field trips, and they have to kind of balance out, are they going to go to a museum or are they going to take a trip to the coast? With those partners, though, we're working with the National Estuarine Research Reserve Systems, so we use them as a resource and really target providing them with information that is relevant about coastal resilience and restoration, and at times hands-on on projects that we're doing that they can get the students involved in if they get that opportunity. So really to make it real, not to just stage something for them. In addition, Dauphin Island Sea Lab has an incredible consortium, and whenever possible, we pull those folks in the National Estuary Program. On top of that, we're really trying to work with folks that do summer camps, and we're finding that some of the summer camps can because the parents will help pay a little bit extra to provide an opportunity, can expose students that might not be exposed through the school year because of those budgetary constraints. So we're looking at different ways to get those messages out and different opportunities and partnering on those, but I'm not sure there's a quick fix.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Juliet, can I add
Oh,
one
yes,
thing
please,
to that?
Steve, go ahead.
One thing I was thinking about too that I think is critical if you're going to bring this out to students and to teachers is it can't be an ancillary program. It has to be built into the existing science standards, the new generation science standards that are going to be addressed. You've got to make sure that the programs, whatever programs we're offering, are not an add-on to what the teachers already have on their plates. Because with all the national science standards and all of the stuff that they have on their plate at this point, you've got to make sure whatever program you're doing is completely embedded and part of their regular curriculum. And if you can do that, then I think you've got a win to get in there.
And with that, one of the things that we were able to do this year through grant funds is pay for a field trip for students to come down and plant marsh grass. But the really great thing is through a vocational school, they were able to actually get the seedlings and grow them up for us prior to doing that. So they got to grow these grasses up, bring them to the field, and plant them at one of the restoration sites that we needed them planted at as part of the project. So we're trying to look for those linkages. They're not always out there, but when we can, we do that the best we can.
And then over there, if you have a question, just wait. Oh, yeah, someone can bring a microphone to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, Farley Smith. I'm wondering about the role of religion and spirituality in the formation of an ocean psyche, if you will. So I'm wondering if you can comment on whether outreach to faith communities is on the radar of ocean advocates at all, or if you see any potential for these partnerships.
I see a pretty huge potential. When we were building our museum and aquarium, we had to raise $56 million, and we thought, well, we're not just building a center, but we're building a network of people. And so we served as a kind of a gathering spot for anyone who might be interested in environmental measures or conservation issues. So there were several mother houses of Catholic nuns. There were several ecumenical groups that had an environmental focus. So they weren't directly working with us, but through our leadership, we had over 45 groups within our small community of Dubuque who all were doing something. Well, we're doing recycling, or we're doing water quality, we're doing this, and some of them were environmental, but many of them were faith-based. And so there was a lot of good sharing, and so it was that's the way we included faith-based groups in our work and kind of nurtured them, and they nurtured us.
Yes, and on the Gulf Coast, they definitely bubbled to the top when we were experiencing the spill, and for the mental health as well as the environmental health issues. One of the really neat things that has happened is we found that several of our faith-based organizations really want to do environmental service projects. They want to help their community. And so for us, it's a really great marriage when it comes down to doing on-the-ground work. Everything from coastal cleanups to really getting out on the ground and doing projects like the Oyster Reef building. They are definitely on our Rolodex and serve as volunteers for the projects we do.
The only thing I'd like to add is on a personal note, all three of my boys were baptized on the beach. So I remember doing that.
There you go. And then I'll just ask the last very quick question, which is if there's one misconception in again, popular culture, contemporary culture that people have about the sea that you're trying to challenge, is there anything you would share about how you're trying to get people to rethink the ocean and our connection?
It's already been mentioned here, but I think that our daily actions, no matter whether we live in the Midwest or whether we live right on the coast, have a direct impact on the ocean, and likewise that the ocean is very influential in our own lives in often unseen ways. And so
And I agree. I think people don't think about that connection coming back to water they're thinking about their daily lives and their daily activities, and almost every single one can come back to connections with the river systems that Jerry mentioned, all the way down to the coast that I'm looking at in the deep sea that you were mentioning. So I think if people think long and hard, they'll see those connections, but it does take some thinking.
It does, and I was surprised when Jean-Michel Cousteau a few years ago, he was making a talk, and he said, what did we find in the Pacific trash gyre? We found a little figurine that said, made in Dubuque, Iowa.
There you go. It all comes down to Iowa.
It all comes back to Iowa.
Certainly in this town,
we
people
cause
believe
everything.
that. Steve, did you realize that?
Just the, I watch it from students. The first and probably most common question that students will be asking of a diver who's underwater is, so are there sharks there? That's always the question. And so I think it's a misconception when they think about that and are educated about what is actually out there. They're always, it's the Peter Benchley story, but bottom line is it has led to misconceptions, and they've started to become educated about what really the ocean is about, and that's a grand thing to see.
Thanks so much. And you can tell them that, of course, having sharks there is a good thing, but sometimes that's a hard sell. I want you to please join me in thanking both our panelists and the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for putting this on.